I want to go across to Vardhan Shringla, former Foreign Secretary in the Government of India. Mr. Shringla, welcome. It's great to have you with us. You know, Prime Minister Modi is in Moscow at a time when leaders of 32 nations of NATO are meeting in Washington, D.C. And this is Prime Minister Modi's first state visit in his third term. So could you start by explaining to our viewers your sense of the significance of Prime Minister Modi picking Russia for his first state visit? Usually in this past 2 terms he went to one of our neighboring countries. He's gone to Russia at a time when NATO is meeting in Washington. What your assessment of the significance of this state visit? Mr. Shringla, welcome.
Thank you, Rahul. Well, I mean, you have to look at it in context. You know, the Prime Minister's first visit was to the G7 after he was sworn in for the 3rd term in office. And he had an extensive interaction with most of the leaders of the Western world at that meeting. And the fact that he's going to Russia also has to be seen in the context of our strategic partnership with Russia, which provides for an annual summit between the 2 leaders. Now, so far we've had 21 summits. And President Putin had visited India in December 2021. So that's almost 3 years or 2.5 years since his visit. And so, you know, Prime Minister's visit in Russia, I would say, is due. Obviously, you know, there are many other factors. You know, one is our bilateral relationship. Russia is an important partner in our energy equation, in terms of defense, in our trade, people-to-people ties. We also cannot discount the fact that the global geopolitics will be part of the discussion. Prime Minister Modi has been in constant touch with both President Zelensky and President Putin. His famous words that this is not an era of war and that we should deal with conflicts through diplomacy and dialogue, I think in many senses sets the tone. If you recall, the G20 summit that India presided over also had in its outcome document among the first paragraphs some of these defining features of our own approach towards the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Prime Minister Modi last visited Russia in September 2019. Since then, Russia and China have become more tightly locked in embrace. India and the United States have built on their strategic partnership. So let's spend a moment on the troubles that China is giving India along the line of actual control and the role potentially Russia could play in trying to help India deal with Beijing.
Well, you know, India has always seen Russia as one of the poles in a multipolar world. But one of the consequences of the Ukraine conflict has been that Russia has been drawn more closely into China's orbit, making it less of an independent pole by itself. Now, our enhanced engagement with Russia, I think, is to draw it out and also, you know, to try and get it to play as a moderating factor in the, you know, India-China relationship, and the fact that Russia being a close, you know, strategic partner of ours can also present a perspective that may not be always evident. So I think from that perspective also this visit is important. I think it underlines our emphasis on balancing between the poles, our efforts to maintain strategic autonomy, but also our efforts to somewhat, you know, play a sort of a role of getting Russia to be more independent. If you notice, President Putin has tried to ensure that he's not only dependent on China. He's made his visits to Vietnam, to North Korea. And I think it's important that there is some, you know, political space for him to maneuver that would allow him to engage other partners other than China.
How is the establishment in the United States likely to look at this visit? It becomes more consequential because of the timing. This is when there's a NATO meeting, as I said, happening in Washington, D.C. So how is the US, which wants to pull India as much as possible into its embrace and into its fold, likely to look at Prime Minister Modi making this very significant state visit to Moscow?
Last year, Prime Minister Modi visited the United States. It was a very successful visit. We concluded some major deals, including for the first time, cutting-edge technologies such as the G144 engine for India's light combat aircraft was provided. We signed the initiative on critical and emerging technologies that gives us access to obviously cutting edge technologies. So we have a relationship, and we have a very strong relationship with the United States. That relationship is growing. And I think the US, in many senses, will understand the context in which our visit is taking place, the Prime Minister's visit is taking place. I think one of those factors is also to ensure that there is a certain amount of effort to put this conflict in some context and try and redress some of the issues that would bring the sides closer. I mean, the recent meeting in Switzerland, which is designed to sort of act as a peace conference, wasn't very successful because Russia wasn't there. India is one of the few major countries that straddles that ideological divide between North and South and East and West. Between the Western powers and Russia and China, we are the one player that can actually contribute. And I think Prime Minister Modi is looking at that factor. He is looking at seeing how India can bring its own approach, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, into this context and see how we can help in resolving that issue that has really not only
can Prime Minister
brought
Modi
conflict into the heart
potentially
of Europe,
play a
but has
role
also
in trying to impact or shape the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Or do you think that is so complex that there's very, very little a player or a country like India can do, given the clear differences between Russia and Ukraine at the moment?
Yes, I think, nobody is saying that you're playing the role of a mediator. But if you see in the current context, many of the leaders who actually tried to do some subtle diplomacy, tried to contribute to resolving the conflict, are today not active any longer, or not seen as impartial to the extent that they can make that effort. And today, I think it leaves very few countries with that, I would say, ability to bring the two sides closer together. So mediation is not the issue. The issue is really understanding both sides in some detail and trying to find areas where both sides could be nudged into a more reasonable stance that could lead ultimately to a resolution to the conflict. So I'm not saying that this visit is a mediatory sort of effort. I'm saying that one of the issues that would be, and one of the major issues that would form the discussion between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin would be, how to look at bringing this conflict to an end. President Putin himself has said he's open
Finally,
to examining, how the conflict could be resolved.
what do you see as being the most critical takeaway from this bilateral state visit? What do you see as being the key items on the agenda and the takeaways our audience should be looking out for?
I think the word bilateral is correct. We will be looking, in my view, at trade, which is a very important factor. Don't forget, Russia contributes to 1/3 of our total energy imports. We have imported about $62 billion of Russian, energy and fuel in the financial year 2024. And I think, there is an imbalance because obviously Russia has exported only $4 billion out of that $66 billion. So we have to redress that balance. And one way to redress this balance is also to look at a rupee-ruble arrangement, where the surplus that Russia holds in that trade balance can be invested in India. After all, the two leaders in 2019 in Vladivostok agreed that Russia would, or both sides would invest, and the investment figure would be about $50 billion by 2025. The two leaders would try and make that possible through some sort of a currency arrangement. And definitely, we will try and increase our own access to the Russian market through agricultural exports, exports of increased pharmaceuticals, engineering goods, etc. So we need to redress that trade balance, which is today very much in Russia's favor, and to look at how we can increase investments. We also have to look at the defense side, because after all, Russia does account for about 60% of our defense platforms today. There have been delays in some supplies of spare parts. So a logistics agreement that could, streamline some of these supplies, try and get, some of our much needed items, ongoing, I think would also be part of that effort. And of course, needless to say, there is also the, people-to-people factor, that the cultural side of it, the educational side of it, and finally, technology. Technology is an important aspect of the relationship. We are working on space. We are working on nuclear energy. what is it that we can do to enhance that technology. So I think the outcomes would be on those lines. Bilateral issues that are of great importance to India, which gives us flexibility, which is part of our strategic autonomy policy, and I think which we have to ensure that we are working with all concerned and we are not working with only one or the other side of our partnerships. And of course, from the Russian side, the defense side has been decreasing. We have been diversifying our own defense collaborations, including with the West. But at the same time, the energy mix has gone up, with Russia providing much more of our energy requirements than before. And I think that is very important, not only in stabilizing our prices in India at a very difficult time, but also stabilizing global prices.
Okay.
So our imports of energy from Russia has to be seen in that context.
You've set the context for this conversation very well. Vardhan Shringla, appreciate you taking out time to join us. Thank you very much, sir.